My conversation with Scott Kretchmar. Scott is an absolute delight. I always enjoy talking with him. He's just such a warm and welcoming person. He's had an outsized influence on the philosophy of sport. I just pulled a few sort of headlines here from articles he's written in a wide range of sources. I mean, Scott's well known for his work in philosophy and kinesiology and sport. Um, just a really important contributor in many aspects. If you pull up any sort of sport-related database and punch in Scott's name, you're going to get an awful lot of results. And of course, he's also really well known for what you might call his coaching tree. Scott is well known for his many successful students who have come through his program at Penn State and gone on to do wonderful things. And I'm sure he is at least partially accountable for their collective success, which is very impressive. But he's just an absolute delight to talk to. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
I see the cat in the background there. He's looking out the window.
He is deep in contemplation. He and I do a lot of thinking together.
All right. Well, that's good. I'm a fan of animals and their intelligence, so I can appreciate what you're talking about.
Yeah. He hasn't picked up reading yet, but he certainly has nailed meditation. So, well, okay. So let's talk a little bit. I'm curious. Part of my goal in this is to get folks who focus on the philosophy of sport a little bit more on the record in a little bit more personal way, because obviously, we publish and people read what we publish, and it's influential more or less depending on what it is. But it's easy, I think, for people to not. I know as a former student, meeting a professor or someone who had written in the flesh, it made a big difference of like, oh, they're mortal. they're real people.
Yep.
So I think this makes it a little more personal, and I think it might help us in the long run for people to get a little more personal look at who does all this great work. So
Agreed.
it's exciting. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background. Where I don't know where you grew up, Scott. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Oberlin, Ohio. My dad was a baseball coach at Oberlin College.
Yeah. Okay.
He came from a blue collar family in Cleveland and was the first in his family to get a college degree, and then went on to get a doctorate at Columbia University in physical education. So he was at Oberlin coaching baseball and teaching theory classes, not philosophy. He was in health education more than any other PE discipline. And so that's how I ended up at Oberlin. He sadly and tragically died my senior year in high school. He contracted cancer, and at that time they didn't know how to treat the certain kind of cancer that he had. And so that was a major event in my life. And I ended up, I was going to go to an Eastern college, but I ended up going to Oberlin because I had my mother and younger brothers living in town, and there was no way I could leave town on the heels of my dad's passing. So
that's too bad.
It worked out great. It was, not my dad's passing, but sure, going to Oberlin worked out fine.
And Oberlin's a small liberal arts college, right? Or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, it's liberal. And so I'm a radical, very, very liberal college. So, part of what I learned about life was in the classroom, but a lot of what I learned about life was outside the classroom, where nearly all the students were very involved in promoting social justice and humanistic living. At that time, many of my fellow students went to the South to do voter registration among the Black communities. One of the hot issues on campus was large, impersonal, inhuman dormitories, and people weren't built to live in those kind of containers. And so the students argued that the school should build more small houses that, house 15 or 20 people that could really get to know one another. And so, Oberlin was quite an amazing place, especially during the Vietnam War and a time of a lot of student protest.
Yeah. How far is Oberlin from Kent? Speaking of Vietnam.
Oberlin is probably an hour and 15 minutes from
Yeah.
Kent.
Okay. To the
So
north, right?
yeah, it's in the northern part. My dad actually taught summer school at Kent to make a little extra money, but he was a professor at Oberlin.
Hmm. Okay. And so you go from Oberlin, and where from there?
Well, I was planning to be a Major League Baseball player.
Oh,
It's odd to go to Oberlin instead of a big time Southern school, but I had a very successful college baseball career and was being scouted and so forth. And I thought this is going to be cool. I love the game. And then I blew out my shoulder and
were you a
couldn't
pi- were you a
throw.
pi- were you a pitcher?
I was a shortstop and
Oh,
pitcher.
okay.
So in both positions, you needed to
Yeah.
have a good hose, as they say. And without that, I decided to go to graduate school. So I applied to five graduate schools. I knew I wanted to be in philosophy of sport or something having to do with humanities. And there were five schools in the country that had people that uh, worked in that area. Three of them wrote back and said, "We'd be delighted to have the son of Robert Kretchmar come to our institution."
Hmm.
I marked them off as definitely not going there because I was, 22 years old and I wanted to spread my own wings and
Sure.
not live on my dad's reputation. And fortunately, USC had two sport philosophers, Eleanor Matheny and Howard Slusher. And they were thinking thoughts that nobody had ever thought in the philosophy of sport before. Most sport philosophers like Earl Ziegler at that time were doing educational philosophy. That is, philosophic principles, idealism, pragmatism, realism related to teaching physical education or coaching sport.
Hmm.
I didn't want to go there. I wanted to be a philosopher. And Matheny and Slusher were not under the educational umbrella. They were asking basic questions about human existence, the good life, human intelligence, and movement. And so it was a real blessing to go to USC and have both of those very inspiring teachers give me a head start.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And so you finished there, and then because it's such an esoteric field, it's difficult to find a home for a PhD. Where was your course after that?
Well, I'll tell a funny story. Maybe some of your listeners have read it, but when I was in my final year at USC, I was dating the niece of the president of AFERD, our National Organization of
Mm.
Physical Education, John Cooper. And Cooper was a very famous guy, and his niece said, "Would you like to meet him?" And I said, "I'd love to." And the national convention was in Las Vegas that year. So drove up to Las Vegas and scheduled a breakfast. She did with John Cooper and had a personal interview. And after ordering food, he asked, "What are you studying?" I said, "Philosophy." He said, "What else are you studying?" And I said, "Absolutely nothing." And he said, "You'll never get a job." I choked on my eggs. So that wasn't a good thing to go back home and tell my new wife about. But
No.
I did get a job. It was through an Oberlin connection. And it was in Kansas, Kansas State Teachers College, now called Emporia State. And I was there 2 years. It was the school to go to in Kansas if you were going to go into physical education. So it was an out of the way school, but it was a good school. I stayed there 2 years until I was summoned by some of my friends and the dean at Brockport, Warren Fraley.
Yeah.
And I could not say no to that. It was closer to home in Ohio. And Fraley had collected a group of five philosophers at that institution. And that was before IAPS started. That was 1971, 2 years before
Okay.
IAPS.
Yeah, I was just about to ask. Okay.
So what a serendipity to go to Brockport, where the action would be
Yeah.
for the next 10 years or so.
And who are those five?
Oh gosh, Carol Susswine, who unfortunately passed on at a young age before she wrote much. Um, Francis Keenan, Bob Osterhout,
Hmm.
Warren Fraley, and Jenny Studer.
Okay.
They're products of Cy Kleiman at Ohio State, Earl Ziegler at Illinois, and Carol Susswine and I, products of Slusher and Matheny from USC.
Okay. And so that ends up becoming effectively IAPS out of that group at Brockport, right?
Yeah, it was a high pressure place. I mean, I was a young guy because I went straight from Oberlin to graduate school, never got a master's degree, 3 years, got my PhD. So I was maybe 27,
Wow.
and there were a lot of good thinkers there. That young group of people were very good. We had what we called the PEP Club, PE philosophers, and we would meet at Warren's house once every 2 or 3 weeks and talk about our research. I mean, talk about pressure.
Hmm.
So, you know, we met individually, and then Warren, of course, was instrumental in inviting Paul Weiss and others to campus. And we had an organization at Brockport called the Centers for Philosophic Exchange, headed by a gentleman named Howard Kiefer. And Kiefer was very open to sport philosophy, even though it didn't exist basically at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had money, and they had a journal, Philosophic Exchange. And Brockport was supposed to be the sixth university center in the SUNY system until economics changed the situation. So they had a philosophy department there that was like a university philosophy department. So the Center for Philosophic Exchange helped Warren get things off the ground. And we had a couple of conferences before IAPS began at Brockport.
You know, to call it the acronym you had, it reminded me at IAPS this past year, I learned that it initially started as the philosophic, what was it? The Philosophic Society for the Study of Sport.
Yeah, we called ourselves the Pissers.
That's right. That's right.
Not exactly a distinguished name for a group of philosophers.
No,
but
so that's an opportunity where we call that now transdisciplinary. You should have talked to the marketing people. That's not a good way to brand yourself.
yeah, we didn't do a very good job of that. But yes, Philosophic Society for the Study of Sport. And the basic reason for the change is we needed to get international in the title.
Yeah.
And because that's the way Warren pictured it. And, you know, we were meeting in different countries at that time, not regularly, but as I mentioned in my talk at our recent philosophy conference, you know, we became international bit
Yeah.
by bit.
That's something that for me, at least, you know, Bill Morgan kind of brought me into it, but going to the first couple conferences and seeing people from all around the world, because sport is, you know, obviously transcultural. And it was just so cool to see all these people in different places who've read the same books and think about, you know, not the same things, but similar things. It was just fantastic to have this like small group, but also like genuinely international group, which I thought was really neat.
It was very important from the get-go. And you know, we faced a problem because when the center of gravity was in the Northeast United States and Southeast Canada, with Western Ontario, where Klaus Meyer was, and so forth. And the problem in leaving that area is that a lot of us young professors who had young families, raising kids, and were poor, couldn't afford to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And so at the first meeting we had in Japan, I did not attend because of financial reasons. I just couldn't afford it. But Warren was insistent that even if we had small attendance, we had to be international. And he was the one who pushed that.
Yeah.
And of course, now I think the truth of the matter is there's more activity internationally than there is in the United States.
Hmm.
So we're
Well,
growing better overseas in a whole lot of countries than in the United States. And in the United States, I would say we're growing more in philosophy departments than we are in kinesiology or physical education.
yeah, that's something myself and a couple of other academics, in my sort of age cohort have talked about. Of like, if you look around, most kines programs are moving toward management and ethic. They offer effectively ethics curriculum, but
Right.
almost nowhere are you seeing full blown philosophy of sport. Um, so that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, we're getting hit. And for the young people who may be watching this, I think it will swing back. But the two factors that have hurt us is the domination by sciences in a lot of our
Yeah.
departments, and the fact that, at least at research universities, money drives the system.
Yeah.
And the physiologists can get multi-million dollar grants. And I haven't heard of a philosopher getting a multi-million dollar grant on his or her own yet.
Yeah.
But,
I thought,
you know, those,
as a student at Ohio State, I wasn't a faculty member there, but I remember thinking to myself, how on earth are the humanities people? There's so much pressure at OSU, this massive state institution, to bring in, national, international grant money. Well,
yeah.
philosophers need a quiet place in a book. Like, it
Well,
doesn't
I
cost
was
much.
very lucky. You're right. We're cheap. And they don't even need to pay us as much as law
Yeah.
professors or medical professors. But um, I was very lucky. And, one of the nicest things that's happened in my career is that when I retired, the deans and the higher ups agreed to hire Javi Lopez Frias, as it turned out, another sport philosopher,
Yeah.
because in many cases, that position would get converted to somebody who could bring in huge grants
Yeah.
and, not keep the philosophy program going. So it was a compliment to me and a real pleasure to see that Javi got that job and that we still have a
Yeah.
viable program at Penn
Well,
State.
and I know a lot of people, again, sort of in my age cohort, who all aboard, watched that unfold and were thrilled about how it unfolded. So it's been
Yeah,
fantastic. I'm sure you're quite proud. I have to say, I just got Javi and Chris's book. Got it
yeah,
in the mail last week. I actually started reading it last night, so
yeah,
I'm quite thrilled about that. And you must be proud about it too.
yeah. I've read it too, and it's really fun. And you know, um, Cesar Torres, is just was a real blessing to come to Penn State. And I know one of the questions that you had mentioned to me was, how I've changed over the years. And, I've had 13 PhD graduates. And one of the things that happens when you have bright, aggressive, and uh, good, good people like I've had is that they educate you.
Mm,
And I was the kind of advisor who never said, you have to study what I'm interested in. I let them fly in the directions that they wanted. And they got to know a number of professors in the philosophy department. And many of them, a couple of them that were very influential in some of my students' lives, were pragmatists. And I didn't study pragmatism, that wasn't my thing. Uh, but I had to learn it because my students were going that
yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
And that's been a good thing for me because it's really complemented the kinds of work that I do. So, that's just one example of how students change their professors. And maybe it happens the other way around too, because I had some things they were required to know. But, that was a real good thing.
Well, so speaking of that, one of the other questions I sent you was about influence. Who's been sort of, whose philosophy most influential on you? Maybe that's a philosopher of sport or philosophy general. I know on more than one occasion you've nudged me to read Searle, which I still haven't done. I'm embarrassed to say, but I'm curious to know who else has been really influential on you.
Well, you always go back to your graduate education. And I mentioned that I studied with Slusher, Man's Sport and Existence.
Yeah.
His book had just come out the year before I went to USC. And then Eleanor Matheny, Movement and Meaning. Her book came out a year after I went to USC. And Slusher was the more flashy of the two. And, he was a very inspiring teacher, talked a lot about authenticity and how athletes need to behave and need to comport themselves in ways that are authentic. And that struck a chord. Matheny was very different. She was a philosopher of symbolism. Ernst Cassirer was her main philosopher of choice. I didn't like the symbolic philosophy, but Matheny asked a question that has shaped my career. And as she put it, her question was, how does a movement mean? And it's a simple sentence or a simple question. How does a movement mean? But what she was after was how intelligence works in nonverbal settings.
Mm-hmm.
And that has stayed with me throughout all these years. Not all of my articles are about that, but that is an enduring kind of question. How does a movement mean? What kind of intelligence do athletes display? And it was partly because of, the dumb jock syndrome and, being a sports person and so forth, and mind-body dualism, denigrating the physical over the mental. And so that dynamic of mind-body dualism, trying to understand how to defeat it and how to redescribe intelligence in non-dualistic ways, something that fascinated me. But the third person,
sorry to interrupt you. I think about that a lot because I've written so much and thought so much about animals, because obviously, language isn't there, but there's so much you can infer from behavior and movement, and so much you can learn about intellect. It's all probabilities, it's all inferential, but it's pretty hard to deny in some cases, some of the brilliant things that animals do that they can't tell you that they've done. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, it'd be nice to be able to have a conversation, but a lot of the research, and one thing I want to mention as we go on is that I've always loved biology. When I was at Oberlin, my friends who are doing pre-med programs had to take biology and math and so forth. They were flunking out on biology. I was getting straight A's in biology as a dumb PE major. And I've always been interested in that. And that provides information on animal intelligence, animal behavior, and so forth. And one of the really cool things that's happened over the 50 years of my career is that biologists have found out that animals are a lot smarter than they thought they were, or that we thought they were, and that there's really a gradation of intelligence from infrahuman animals to human animals, us. And it's better to conceptualize intelligence as a gradation, as well, perhaps a little bit as a difference in kind, but at least it's partly a gradation.
I have a joke that I sometimes use with my students. We talk about animal intelligence, and the man named Jonathan Balcombe wrote this book called What a Fish Knows. And the joke with my students is it's a very short book. It just says nothing. And that's the end of the book. But of course, that's not true. It's, it's a 300-page book. There's a lot that fish know. So even without the language. But anyway, you were going to mention your third influence.
Oh, my third person, yeah. At USC, it was Dallas Willard, a phenomenologist in the philosophy department. He did his dissertation on Husserl's logical investigations. When I went to USC, the department had said, I'm going to enroll you in philosophy of education. Everybody takes it here at USC because you're going to be a physical educator, right? I said, no, I don't want to go to the education department. I want to go to the philosophy department. So they waived that requirement, and I went to philosophy. And the first course I took was a 500 level seminar on being in time, Heidegger.
Yeah.
That's not what you want to cut your teeth on.
You don't want to jump in the deep
first
end.
Year graduate student. And the professor was this gentleman named Dallas Willard. Brilliant, kindly, wonderful human being. And he taught me how to be a professor. I mean, he also turned me into a phenomenologist, but he taught me how to be a mentor and a professor. One day in class, one of the students, who was probably a third year PhD student about ready to graduate, went expounding on something using language I had never heard before. And my head was spinning, and I'm thinking, God, I'm in the wrong place. I cannot be sitting in this class and get through it and understand the stuff. Willard, in a very kindly way, undressed this kid and said something to the effect that in philosophy, we're not here just to talk to one another. We're here to find out how to make life go better.
Hmm.
If we don't do that in philosophy, we have no business reading these things and discussing these ideas. He was telling the guy, quit showing off,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
talk to us as people, you know, be clear. And one of the things I would talk to my graduate students later when I came here to Penn State was that our first obligation is to be clear, to communicate well, because people get turned off on philosophy if you
Yeah.
wow them.
Yeah.
You want to say something that's meaningful. And so, I had a few students over the years that, wanted to use the big language all the time and so forth. And I said, easy, easy, how can you say that in a more direct, clear way? And of course, as you know, if you're going to be clear and simple, you have to really know the stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's actually a good lesson in comprehension, because you can lean on big time terms without knowing what the heck you're talking about.
I remember hearing a quote. I wish I could recall who it was from or the quote. I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but it was something to the effect of, if you can't explain it succinctly and clearly, then you don't understand it.
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
Yeah, that's really the truth. And when grad students come to your program, of course, they want to excel and they want to be seen as intelligent and so forth. And I I tell them, I know you're intelligent.
Yeah.
I've checked your records and so forth. You don't need to impress me. You need to communicate clearly
Mm.
and take your time. And I had a couple of grad students who came who wanted to publish right away. I mean, they were really, I'm going to get out there with some stuff. I said, no, wait,
Yeah.
read, think,
Yeah.
a little bit before you jump into the fire. And so that was another thing, is that, it takes a little time to accumulate the language and the ideas and the insights to write good philosophy. So patience is a virtue.
Yeah. So I wonder, it's a question. I know it's not a fair question, but if you had to pull three articles, maybe from Journal Philosophy of Sport or Sport Ethics and Philosophy, or a sport oriented article out of a different journal, of course. I mean, if I were starting with a new master's student and said, let's get on the track of philosophy of sport,
Yeah.
what are the first three steps you think?
Oh, yeah.
I know it's not a fair question.
You let me know about that question beforehand, and I'm still pondering it. Um, I'm not sure it's easy to identify a given article. The first one that caught my attention when I was a graduate student was Keating's Sportsmanship as a Moral Category.
Oh yeah, yeah,
It's a good article. It's not a great article. It's a good article, but it was written by a philosopher, and he was addressing issues that I hadn't thought about before in a way that I hadn't been thinking. And so I remember reading and rereading and reading again that article to try to figure out, how this end-directed philosopher, was trying to make his case. And so that article had a big effect on me because I really enjoyed it. I liked the flow of the argument, and watching a well-seasoned and competent philosopher try to make a case. And so I would say to young students, find something you're interested in. I liked ethics, and so I was interested in sportsmanship.
mm-hmm.
And so that was fun to read that article and to hear Keating argue that a different ethic applies to different formats of play. And I wasn't sure I agreed with that, but it was an interesting argument. So that was one. Boy, I don't know. You know, every article is the most important one when I'm working on it. Like Suits's words on play. It's an interesting article, and the talk I just gave in the Czech Republic addressed that paper. That's a good article too, and it's
when was that
an
published?
important
Mid
one.
70s, I think.
Yeah, it was an early paper,
Yeah.
and I guess I felt in my graduate program that there were several things that the students had to address if they were going to be a sport philosopher. So we would go through a series of seminars during the 3 years they were here. And one of them would be on mind body. What is it to be an embodied person? What is it to move? How do we think when we move? And so there were a whole series of readings that I did on that. And there are a whole bunch of articles out there that are very good on the issue of mind-body dualism. So that would be one area, I would say, find something in that area. The second one had to do with the nature of our subject matter, games, play, sport. And nobody should graduate with a PhD without being aware of the literature in game, play, and sport to know what they are, what the fights have been. Is sport art? Is it not art? All of the different questions we've raised about our subject matter. Why are we so fascinated with the stupid stuff called sport that doesn't produce anything? So that should be a major question that students try to understand. And then the third one was ethics. And we need to understand both the two sides of ethics, good behavior and the good life, and what has been written in those areas. So they would read McIntyre and, things in that area that had to do with ethics broadly
McIntyre?
understood.
Oh, man.
No, I put the classics in front of people.
Yeah.
So, I didn't want them reading secondary sources. So the grad students had to read Merleau-Ponty. They had to read Sheets Johnson. They had to read Polanyi when we were doing mind body. And they had to read Huizinga. They had to read Grasshopper. They had to read, that kind of literature when we were doing games play and so forth. So no, we struggled through things together so that they read some things. And then I had marvelous support from the philosophy department that, my program would not have gone without that help. So
that's great.
That's a long-winded answer to my 3 favorite articles. So I didn't really tell you. I couldn't identify them. It was a little bit easier with my 3 favorite books. Would you like me to mention those?
Yeah, of course. Let's hear. I have to guess that the Grasshopper is on the list, but who knows? Could be wrong.
Yeah, of course it's on the list. I mean, it's probably the book that has most influenced our field if you had to pick one. And I love the book. I hate the book. I've struggled with it, and it keeps calling me back, and I keep writing articles about it, which I shouldn't do. But yes, the Grasshopper is important. And now with Nguyen's book out there, and a sort of revitalization of Seussian scholarship. He's more popular now than he's ever been.
Yeah, that book just arrived in the mail as well. Games Agency as Art, I think it's a subtitle.
Yeah, Agency as Art, right.
I know it made a huge splash when it was first published, and I'm a bit behind on my reading list, but that's pretty high on my queue.
Yeah, it's a good book. And it's nice that he's given credit to Suits. So Suits, the Grasshopper, is being read more by regular philosophers now than ever before. I love Polanyi. He was a physicist in his early life, and
know that.
Einstein called him the most brilliant man he'd ever met.
Now, who's Einstein? I've never heard of him.
Yeah, I know. Well, whoever that German guy was.
Yeah.
But in any case, Polanyi switched from physics to philosophy. And he was a student basically of Merleau-Ponty. And my students would read Merleau-Ponty, Phenomenology of Perception, but Polanyi is much more accessible and easier to understand. And so I think Polanyi's book Meaning is one that's crucial.
Okay.
Uh, I always used my second book would be Simon's Fair Play. You know, I always found it hard to find good ethics stuff for my classes.
Yeah.
Simon was the best thinker we had and in ethics area. And so they would read his book Fair Play and then a whole bunch of other stuff too. But I would put that on the list.
If I can just throw in a quick comment about Fair Play, it's wonderful. It's so well done. The examples are so clever and they're so illustrative. But I always find that undergraduates end up, I think Suits called it dialectical vertigo, but you might call it whiplash of like, it's right, it's wrong, it's right, it's wrong. I mean, his Socratic dialogue, students just get head spun. Just keep
Yeah,
reading.
I know.
Just keep reading. It's gonna clear up.
Yeah, I know the vertigo and the headaches because I would use that class in my senior level undergraduates for them too, and they would shake their head and say, you know, why doesn't he just tell us the truth?
He just cut to the
Rather
chase.
than go pro and con, you know, and so
Yeah.
forth. So
But the more you think it through, the more you realize he's not just filling pages. He's showing the work, so to speak, as a mathematician would say, show your work.
well, and some ethical issues are sort of 50-50 kind of propositions.
The best ones are that way. Yeah.
Yeah, the best ones. And so, you know, if you find out it's 50-50, you've made progress
Right.
rather than assuming that, you know, some demagogue on one side has
Yeah.
got the whole truth.
Yeah. My
So,
students go frustrated with that. Often they'll say, so how, what's the result? Is it right or wrong? And I just say, yeah, like, right. Is it right or wrong? That's where we are.
yeah. Well, those are some of the books and, you know, some of the areas that I've enjoyed teaching and I've enjoyed reading. You know, you mentioned philosophy of language and Searle.
Hmm.
Uh, I keep going back to him because he helps me understand conventions, uh, institutions. He used the words back and forth, and that was crucial in my helping me understand what a game is and how games come to be. But you know, as a biological philosopher, which is what I regard myself to be, I love looking for the roots of things. And, you know, as philosophers have said, ideas don't come from nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that in spades. You know, our games don't come from nowhere. Our thinking doesn't come from nowhere. Our intellectual tendencies, like a tendency toward dualism. I mean, we
Yeah.
like dichotomies. Where did that come from? And I like to try to answer those questions. So, as you know, I've written some things having to do with the roots of play and the roots of games in terms of human evolution.
Yeah.
And
I don't know.
uh,
I hope people have read the Normative Heights of Depth and Play, or the normative heights and depths of play. That to me, like, that's one of my favorite pieces that you've written. I really like that one.
well, thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure that it grabs many of our sport philosophers. You know, biology, evolution.
Yeah, so that's what I
You
liked
know,
about it.
that's what I like about it too. And I just wrote an article with a physicist in our department that we used to fight with each other. And we agreed, he's not a physicist, he works on the brain and human intelligence from an empirical standpoint.
Oh yeah.
And so we tried to write an article on human intelligence. And, you know, I can't go there without looking at roots of intelligence and how the human and us human beings, we human beings grew up as intelligent creatures and what some of the benchmarks of intelligence were. And, he's looking at it from his discipline of, sort of empirical psychology. And, we came to some agreements on things, but we couldn't understand it without looking at the evolution, the growing from smaller to bigger, the increases, some of them gradual, some of them more dramatic over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the interesting questions that I've dealt with is, why is it that animals obviously play so well? And some of the biologists, as I mentioned in that article you cited, even go down to cockroaches, have been found play fighting with one another, and they don't even have a central nervous system. So, how is it that, life we make fun of, like fish and cockroaches, play?
Mm-hmm.
And yet gaming behavior, that is inventing an artificial problem, is something that's at least totally, or at least more exclusively, reserved for the kind of intelligence that you and I exhibit.
Right.
What is it about our intelligence that allows us to go there, whereas a dog and a cat can't quite go there? They can play in game-like ways. We can play tug of war and stuff like that, but
yeah,
they don't understand the logic, of means ends, and harder is better, and the kinds of logic that game constructors use.
Yeah. But there are other elements that I find quite fascinating, intriguing, and about animals. Like, there are often, it's, I don't know if it's anecdotal or how empirical it is, because I don't know that research, but there seems to be a sense of justice and fairness in animal play sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, two dogs are playing, one bites the other just a bit too hard, and then there's the yelp, and then there's the sort of apologetic bow of like, oh, I broke the code there. That's, again, it's anecdotal, but that's not nothing. There's something complex going on there. So I'm always kind of fascinated by that.
Oh, I think you're on a good thing. One of my favorite biology writers is E.O. Wilson. He's the guy who studied ants and was famous for that. And one of the things in a recent book he wrote had to do with playgrounds, which has been a topic that I've written on. And his argument is that ants have playgrounds that we can never, ever access as human beings. They live in a wonderful world that their sensory systems allow them to traffic in and enjoy. And, we'll never be there. We humans think we own the play world, we have the magical play world and so forth. But all animals have a play world, and they have an intelligent system that allows them to access that play world that's specific to them. And I think that requires us to have a little more respect for our animal friends who play.
Yeah. I like the philosopher and ethicist Tom Regan, who's famous for his views on animal rights. But one of the things he frequently talked about was taking a conservative approach. Like, the more you learn about these things, the more you realize that there's more there. And so, in the face of that sort of uncertainty, the correct political approach, he thinks, is conservatism. Be cautious and give the benefit of the doubt, because there's probably more under the surface than you realize.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
So I always appreciated his approach on that. It's odd, of course, because he's viewed as a relatively extreme liberal, yet he has this conservative, what he considers a conservative approach to it. So anyway.
No, I think caution and humility are good virtues.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
To pompously argue that, we control everything, we smart people control everything, is dangerous. And we shouldn't go there. So respecting the whole range of life is something that is a good thing to do. And it's not only good, it's smart. Have you read this book, The Life of Trees? Or that isn't quite the title of it.
Mm-mm.
It's how trees communicate with each other.
Oh, I know about this. No, I think I heard a podcast about it, but I've not read it.
Maybe it's The Secret Life of Trees. But it's a fascinating, tiny little book that's fascinating, that empirically shows how trees communicate with one another and, in quotation marks, care for one another.
Yeah, and I seem to recall something about like nutrient sharing and certain empirical work that shows that they won't spread roots almost like in a territorial way. You know, there's roots here, so
Exactly.
we'll push the other way and so forth. Yeah, I seem
Yeah.
to. I think I heard a podcast about it and was quite fascinated by it.
Yeah, no, that's the book. And, you know, talk about respecting animals. How about plants?
Yeah,
And the kinds of things plants are capable of doing that we pompous human beings, never, never fathom, never thought about.
yeah, and I recall seeing a similar thing about mycology, about fungi, um, and being blown away by the idea that some of the largest or living organisms on Earth are mushrooms, underground mushrooms that have these enormous networks that spread over acres and acres of land. I mean, they're the
Yeah.
huge mushrooms, which is really quite cool.
Yeah. Viruses have done pretty well too.
I'm not sure how I feel about that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I'm not quite as thrilled for that
They've
one.
been around for a while and they seem to not be going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not great. I'm actually also sometimes I'll read two books at once, and I'm currently also reading Will McCaskill's book, What We Owe the Future. Have you heard of this?
No. That looks,
It's The Case for Long-Termism. Subtitle is The Million Year View, and he discusses several threats to the long-term prosperity of Homo sapiens, and of course, one of them is pandemics, natural and man-made, and
right.
it's a rather harrowing chapter of the book of like, oh man, yeah, this
Well,
is a real
I
problem.
might save that for when I'm in a good mood.
So, the book is like equal parts terrifying, but also profoundly uplifting because it's he is ultimately an optimist. That's why he wrote the book, because he thinks that, we have millions of years ahead of us,
Yeah.
which is great news, of course, for the species. So we better make sure that we don't do anything to undermine our future, our long-term future.
Yeah,
So
that's good. Well, yeah, I've seen some things recently on ecology too, that some of the steps that have been taken worldwide are having an effect.
yeah,
And while we may not be able to undo all of the harm, we're on the right track.
yeah.
So that's very heartening news.
Yeah, I hope that's true. A friend of mine, as you know, I'm at Miami University, and a good friend of mine, we were undergraduates together. He might actually be a genius. He's like this sort of summa cum laude, computer science and philosophy. We did it all very easily. Like it all just seemed, like a breeze to him. Just a very
Mhm.
impressive guy. But he's working now in agriculture and doing things on not just carbon neutrality, but carbon negative. He's trying to find ways to
Mhm.
sort of capture carbon through agronomy. And I've heard him talk about it, and it's just to think that there are people like him out there working on this problem.
Yeah.
Just I sleep much better at night knowing that there are people like him trying to solve these problems for us, because he's great. So that's
Yeah, we
encouraging.
need him and he needs philosophers.
Well, that's funny because he and I have had several conversations, and he has asked me questions about, philosophy and ecology and ethics, and he cares about sort of what I think and know about these things, to the extent that I know anything. So, another question I wanted to ask you, just because I think it's important about, especially people who have put the time in. I think the idea of moral reflection and change is something that, in politics, they call you a flip flopper if you change your mind about something. But I
Mhm.
don't think in philosophy, we call it sort of maturity and humility, or at least I do. So I think it's important for people to admit, oh, I was wrong about that. I've changed my views on that. And I wonder if that's happened to you, if there are certain things where you think, well, I used to believe this and now I believe that.
Yeah. If I look at my writing, I've changed a bit. The first article that got some attention from Test to Contest
Yeah.
was more analytic, and so I was trying to distinguish this from that, and I think I argued in largely an analytic kind of way that contest presupposes test logically speaking. You can't have a contest without a test, and I tried to show why that was the case and so forth. And I'm less enamored with that kind of writing anymore. I'm more interested in messy, less analytic, less clear cut, kinds of arguments, tendencies rather than dichotomies, and
Yeah.
possibilities, tendencies, proclivities, rather than slam dunk kinds of outcomes. And I think it's partly the biology and the evolutionary interest. And it's partly, as I mentioned earlier, my graduate students studying with pragmatists over in the philosophy department and coming back with pragmatic ideas. And so, I'd say I'm half phenomenologist, or maybe a third phenomenologist, a third pragmatist, and a third biologist. you know, Sort of an unholy alliance, but I guess it works for me. so
Yeah.
um,
I was half
I've
waiting
tried.
for you to make a Yogi Bearism there and say you're a third this, a third that, and a half this. That's something he might have
Yeah,
said.
that's well. I could do. Yogi Berra had some good ones.
Yeah.
Yogi Berra,
Yeah.
rather. Yeah. No, it's. I think the fact that you mentioned that one of the things that I've been very fortunate is having graduate students, and I've got a number of kids out there in jobs. You can't be an advisor of graduate students and not get changed by them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think if you're working more without graduate students and you're choosing your own writing and you're choosing your own reading, and all the choices are more yours rather than shared with somebody else, then you're less likely to change. So, I had one student do a dissertation on religion, that is St. Paul's attitudes toward the body. And okay, I hadn't read a whole lot about St. Paul and his attitudes toward the body, but I had to stay
Yeah.
up with this kid. Had another student wanted to do something on Zen Buddhist attitudes toward competition, and how a Zen Buddhist would deal with competitive issues and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I could go on and on with the different topics that the students have identified that they want to do research on. Some of them were very close to home, a lot of them weren't.
Yeah.
And so I had to read to keep up with them.
That's nice though. Like you said, it sort of makes your own toolbox bigger as you go along,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Well, when grad students would come to me, I did a couple of things. And if anybody listens to this and is planning on developing a graduate program, um, I would always interview them so they can meet me and I can meet them. This is for a PhD student because their life will change. My life will
yeah.
change if they come to Penn State. It's not a fly by night kind of decision. So I want to meet them in person. Cesar Torres flew up from Argentina. I told him, I apologized. I said, Cesar, I cannot take you unless we meet and talk person to person. He says, no problem, Dr. K, I'll be up there next week. So he flew up from Argentina, and I was in one of my classes the next week.
Yeah. I was going to say
But
that turned out pretty well. I think it was time well spent for him.
yeah, after I met him and saw the fire in his eyes, I said, I think I would like this student.
Yeah. Good.
So the other thing that I would always ask the students is what their movement background was, because I believe in my heart that good philosophy, good sport philosophy is funded by personal experience. You don't have to be a great athlete or anything like that, but you have to be a movement kind of person,
Mhm.
exercise, running, whatever. And so I wanted to see if these people love to move, because if they're going to study it for 3 years and spend their whole damn life, talking about movement, I wanted them to have a personal stake in it.
Yeah.
It improved the quality of their life. And that's why they want to share the story and do research on it. And I met a couple of students over the years that came who I really felt belonged better in the philosophy department. They didn't have much of a stake in movement, as far as I could tell when I interviewed them. And so I would say, come to Penn State. We have great people in the philosophy department. I can be on your committee. and but you should get your degree in philosophy, not in kinesiology.
Hmm.
And so I think I was on a couple of committees over in the philosophy department, but the kids weren't there. So, those were things I wanted to know, and I came to learn over the years that motivation is more important than raw intelligence. That's sort of a
Yeah.
bad thing to say in a way, because all of our students had to take GRE scores, and departments compete with each other, and they show what the average kinesiology GRE is compared to the average GRE in biology. So we were all under pressure to get kids that had high GRE scores. So we had no dummies. But when I interviewed students, I wanted to sort of intuit the fire in their belly, so to speak.
Mm.
Were they really motivated? Or were they just sort of wandering around and they happened by Kretchmar and philosophy of sport? And so I think that has served well, because virtually all the students I've had really cared about kines, they cared about movement, they cared about health and fitness, they cared about sport, and most of them are out there now
Well,
telling the story.
I don't need to tell you this. I'm sure you know it, but it's worth saying. And I'd hate to think that I never said it to you, but to look around at all your former students and the things that they have done and the things that they are doing, it's incredible. It's incredible. You've done more than anybody to sort of create that tree. Um, and you must be proud of it. I certainly hope you're proud of it, because it's incredible. It's really
Well,
excellent.
I am, I'm a self-doubter, and so, I beat myself up too much, but I appreciate what you said, and I am proud of my kids. And we took a group picture at the
Yeah.
recent Penn State thing, and I have it on my desk here, and I look at it, and it just warms my heart to see those. Uh,
It's a big picture. There's a lot of
it's a
people in
big
it. Yeah.
picture.
Which
So it's gratifying, and I guess that was what the good Lord wanted me to do with my life, was to be a teacher, and to have that opportunity. And I was at Brockport for 13 years, and by the end of my 13 years, I was championing at the bit to have doctoral students, because I couldn't have them there.
Yeah,
And
right.
Brockport was a wonderful place. Warren Fraley was my dearest friend. And I had other people to talk to there in philosophy of sport. Almost no other place was like that. But I wanted to have doctoral students. So my wife said, I'll go to three schools if you can get a job there. Ohio State, because we're Ohio people.
Mhm.
Penn State, because she had seen the campus. I was a women's golf coach at Brockport, and we'd been down to Penn State. And UMass, I was a visiting professor at UMass
Oh
for a
yeah,
semester.
right.
So she loved UMass and the English. So get a job there. I said, honey, nobody hires sport philosophers anywhere in the world. And
Yeah.
you're limiting it to three places. Well, I don't know if she would have held me to it, but I was offered a job at a school out west. And she said, no way are we going out there. It was a doctoral school, but I won't say which school it was. So lo and behold, department headship opens up at Penn State. And I had been department head at Brockport.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, let's see if that works. So long and short of it is I came to Penn State as a department head at age 39. I was way too young. And then endured that for 6 years. I wasn't a particularly effective administrator, I would have to say, and returned to my true love, the scholarship and the
Yeah.
teaching in philosophy of sport.
Well, that's great. That we
So
did it. We one more question. Sandra wrote in for this question. I don't know Sandra. Do you know her?
very well. I was just in the Czech
Oh,
Republic with her.
oh, great. So you know very well then. I don't know
Yep.
her, I'm sad to say. But she did. She asked, which opportunities do you see for recapturing the political as philosophers of sport community beyond Husserl? I think this is a question for you and her, because I don't know much about this.
Yeah, well, she gave a paper on politics in the Czech Republic.
Hmm.
And, she's involved with sport organizations that draw up rules on who gets to play and who doesn't get to play, the
Mm.
whole issue about, gender
Yeah.
identification
Yeah.
and so forth. And these are very, very tough ethical issues with pros and cons, on both sides of many of the issues.
And close ties to biology, as you pointed out before. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, you can't answer those kind of questions without knowing biology
Right.
well and so forth. So, yeah, I think it emerges um, naturally from our interest in ethics. If we care about the good life, if we care about fair play, if we care about these things that are so near and dear to our hearts, or should be, then involvement in political issues is a natural movement.
Mm.
Um, so I applaud people like Sandra who are trying to work through very sticky, difficult political issues with national organizations that have multiple agendas.
Yeah.
And that's part of the
Competing
problem. And
agendas. Right.
I was a faculty athletic rep for 10 years at Penn State. And so I would say to Sandra, I've had 10 years of very intimate, close contact with trying to make a difference in a multi-billion-dollar organization, the
Yeah.
NCAA,
Yeah.
that runs college sports. And I sponsored legislation that got defeated. I took stances that weren't popular. Um, I fought with a couple of coaches here at Penn State who wanted to do things that I thought weren't proper for the students, the athletes. In a couple of cases, I had to go to the athletic director and the president of the university to say, will you back me on this? Because power coaches can
Oh
get
yeah.
people like me fired.
Right. Right.
And you know what it's like at Ohio State. So, Penn State's the same way. And so I had to be very politically careful not to do stupid things and to pick my fights. But I couldn't sit by as a sport ethicist and let certain things happen
Yeah. Yeah.
that were wrong. And so, yeah, I've had my brush with trying to change institutions with limited success. I would have to say,
Yeah.
but
That's power in politics, right? I mean, as you rightly pointed out, there's
yeah,
an exponential growth in power as you move up within some of these institutions, and right or wrong, sometimes you just can't overcome that. So,
and it drives me crazy that the news media often go to quote unquote famous athletes
yeah.
to get their opinion about these things.
Yeah.
You know, they don't know Immanuel Kant from Bentham. They've never heard of these people. They have
Yeah.
no idea the dynamics that go into ethical thinking and
You know,
so forth.
I don't remember if we spoke about this, but Miami University here, a couple of years ago, we had a guest lecture series. It's a big series. We get wonderful people. And one of the persons we brought in was Pete Rose, and he gave a talk on the ethics of sport. And I was just floored and dumbfounded by that. So I did get involved with it, and I got to spend the day with Pete Rose, which was, I have many stories about one day with Pete Rose, but I just thought how funny it was that they would ask Pete Rose about ethics in sports.
Did he
Um,
have his feet on the ground pretty well?
no, not really. No, 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 but he didn't really honestly talk about ethics in sports. He talked about more like grit, resilience, determination, the things that he was known for as a player.
Mm-hmm.
Being hard nosed and playing hard and never giving less than 100%. Very on brand for Pete Rose, the ball player. Never mind everything else he is.
Right. Well, during my 10 years as faculty rep at Penn State, of course, I got to know all the coaches well, including Joe Paterno.
Yeah.
And, he's passed on, of course, and he was caught up in this scandal that we had at Penn State. But Joe had this sort of lily white reputation at Penn State. He cared about the athletes. He graduated everybody, almost everybody, and so forth. And I had heard about his reputation when I came to Penn State and then when I took this job. So I invited Peter Arnold over from Great Britain to give a talk. and it was advertised, and Joe was a faculty member in our department. And lo and behold, he shows up for this meeting. I think it was during football season, and he's sitting in the front row listening to Peter Arnold talk about the ethics of competition. And Joe asked the first question. And so he was an intellectual. He was an English major at Brown University.
Yeah, I've always heard that about him.
And I interacted with him on a number of occasions where his hypocrisy would have shown if he were a hypocrite. And, his feet were put to the fire, so to speak, ethically. And to my experience, he always stood up for the athlete, for the right thing. A professor called me one afternoon and said, one of the starting tailbacks is cheating in my class. What should I do? And I said, do what you would do with any other student. He's a student at Penn State, isn't he?
Right.
He says, I don't want to do that. He's a star football player and so forth. I want Paterno to know. So I said, well, I guess I could let Joe know about it if you want, but you're control your classroom. You can do anything you want. So I told Joe, and Joe kept him out of a couple of games. He was a star. And Joe told me, he said, this kid has got to learn a lesson. You don't do that in life. That isn't how you get ahead. And so, Joe walked the walk. And I don't know all the details about the Sandusky thing, but my relationship with Joe was A+. And I think he was a man of integrity.
That's good to hear. I have friends who are from State College as well. And when all that happened, they said similar things. And I know there's some, Ron Smith wrote that book about it, which isn't completely flattering at all for Joe Paterno, but.
Right.
Do you know Ron?
Very
you probably
well.
do. Yeah. I mean, I assumed you did.
Yeah. Sport historian. And he does very good history. And like a lot of things, Joe is a complex person. And, so I respect the work that Ron does. And the whole incident at Penn State was just utterly painful. It's still painful that happened here. But that's another story. And Penn State has moved on and so forth. And hopefully the incident has helped kids around the country, because I know it caused a lot of publicity and new rules and different schools and so forth. And I hope it had good effects.
There's some good research done on it. In fact, a group of my undergraduates, I teach a capstone course, and there's a group of students now who are studying the subject and writing these proposals. It's all just a part of the course. But like you said, students teach you a lot. And I know a lot about the subject, or at least a moderate amount, but these students are teaching me more and more. And it's a complex problem. There's nothing unique about what happened at Penn State, unfortunately. It happens in a lot of places for a lot of reasons. It's very, very complex.
And culturally, we've, brushed it under the carpet and haven't dealt with it straight on. So I think our incident at Penn State, as unfortunate as it was for the kids involved there, had an effect, in terms of the kind of training people who are in contact with kids have to have, and the kind of surveillance and the kind of protections that are in place now. So that's all Scott, to the good.
I know we're over an hour now, and I don't want to take too much of your time. And I also have a meeting myself I have to get ready for, but I can't tell you how grateful I am. I always enjoy talking with you, and I know that others who get a chance to view this will be pleased to hear this sort of some of the insight you've shared. And it's just great. And I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to you for taking on this project. It's a very good project, and hopefully it'll help support our field and our mutual love for philosophy of sport. So we're in this game together, and I hope that your podcasts go well.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for too. Thanks.
Okay.